morning.
Yeah, sounds good. Hey, thank you, Vicki. Appreciate it. Yeah, so good to be with you guys today. I'm coming from my studio in New Jersey. As Vicki said, I'm the resident artist for Winsor Newton, and I'm the director of their Fine Art Collective education program. So my background is I'm a painter. I graduated from the Fine Art Academy, the New York Academy of Art, in Manhattan as a MFA. I got that there, and then went on to teach at a few different colleges, first at St. John's University in Queens, New York, where I taught painting, drawing, a little bit of art history. Pretty much, that was my first teaching job. Pretty much anything that they would allow me to teach, I jumped in and I taught it. I even did a little photography and jewelry design for a while, but I'm a painter. And I left the academic world in 2009 to become the resident artist and the director of education for Winsor Newton. And also another company I think you guys probably know, even though you're watercolorist, Winsor, Liquitex rather, is our sister company to Winsor Newton. So I get to be associated with both of those brands, and I'm really proud to be able to do that. So today, Vicki said, we're going beyond the brush, right? We're going to talk about color today. And this is a fun topic for me because I sort of consider myself a colorist, and I also like the history of pigments and the history of color. So I can get a little geeky about this, and I think that you guys maybe will get a little geeky about it too. So I'm going to share some actual pigment samples with you, their sources, the paint that we make today, but just a brief history about the company. We date back to 1832. So a long history for us. That goes back to a place in London called Rathbone Place, where a scientist, William Winsor, and the artist Henry Newton got together. So this merger of science and art. And we were really the first to develop moist watercolors. So watercolor is really in our history, even though we deal with oil today as well. We deal with acrylic and we deal with gouache, the opaque cousin to watercolor. But watercolors are origin. So fun to be here with you guys today. And what we're going to do is we'll flip to my overhead camera right now. And it's not giving me, I think, yeah, there you go, Vicki. Thank you so much for that. Or Susan. Yeah, it's not giving me the opportunity to do that. So I'll give you a little clue if we want to get back to that. But a quick few things here. So I just mentioned the Fine Art Collective North America. If anybody's on Instagram, you might want to take a screenshot or jot it down now. TFAC, the Fine Art Collective North America, is our Instagram for our education program. And we do, since the start of COVID last gosh, almost a year ago, we have about, I think, 17 to 18, maybe 20. Oh, there you go. Thank you so much, Vicki. We have about 20 live streams on there. So we'll do hour-long live streams. So for instance, tomorrow coming up at noon on TFACNA, I will be doing a live stream I'll be using Winsor Newton Designer's gouache, and I'll be talking about how to simplify details in a painting, those details that can be, otherwise kind of overwhelming for people. And I see Vicki put that up there. There's me, Jimmy Leslie Art, if you want to come say hi. I do a lot of watercolor sketches in my sketchbook as preliminary sketches, and post those as well as finished work. And then we've got at Winsor and Newton. And then finally, with the hyphens in between, the fineartcollective.com/EN, we've got newsletters there that we do about every 2 months. And some of those will have really fun articles on pigments. And also, I don't have this written down, but in case you guys are not aware of it, two other Instagrams and one other site I want to direct you to. One Instagram is World Pigment Day, at World Pigment Day. It's a really fun one if you want to get into color. They play with a lot of pigments. They make some of their own paints out of that. So that's World Pigment Day. And the other fun one is at Pigment Hunter, at Pigment Hunter. They're on the hunt for pigments. Again, really super color specific. And last one, you guys may know Kremer Pigments in Manhattan. And if you don't know Kremer Pigments, visit them, Kremer Pigments. I think it's just kremerpigments.com. And it's, once COVID's over, and if you're in Manhattan and you can visit, it's like this apothecary for, an apothecary for color, for artist colors. And they also have on their site recipes. So if you want to actually make your own watercolor, they've got recipes for doing that. And that's kind of a fun thing. But I'm here's what we're going to start with. If you look at my overhead view here, I'm going to make an assumption that you are all, or not all, but some of you are possibly teachers. So with that in mind, if you're ever teaching a beginner watercolor class, the three colors first, before we get into our pigment section, that I want to point out to you are what we consider to be our primary colors. So I know this is a little tough to see here, a little shiny, but that's Winsor blue red shade. I'm going to show you on our color wheel here. Winsor blue red shade. We've got permanent rose. You can see that a little bit clearer. Permanent rose. And then we've got Winsor lemon. So of course, you all know any red, yellow, and blue is a primary color, of course, right? But these are our suggested ones. And the reason they're suggested is because those are the ones that are going to give us the clean secondary mixes. So our Winsor lemon, our Winsor blue red shade, which is a phthalocyanine, and our permanent rose all fall more on the transparent side of the scale. And a lot of times I think with watercolor, people think, well, everything's transparent, but not so. We're going to look at some colors that are not transparent today, but those all are, and they really help make for your cleaner secondary mixes. So when we're looking at color and we're paying attention to these, with our permanent rose and our Winsor blue, we'll get a very, very deep violet out of that we can then mute if we want. And that's always easier to mute that more vibrant color or that deeper color. We're over here, if we also use what we would refer to is, there we go, what we would refer to as our primary colors, but not ones that make the cleanest mixes. We've got a cadmium red and a cobalt blue, both more on the opaque side, and they make this very muted violet, which, you know, for somebody just starting out in watercolor, that's not going to be what they're expecting out of a secondary color mix. Possibly a beautiful color, right? If we're dealing with something where there's, I don't know, maybe a rocky sea coast or anything like that. I imagine pavement in a street scene, because I do a lot of things like that. That could be a really beautiful muted color, but it's not that violet that we have here. And of course, I have that thinned out a bit more here, so we bring out the color intensity even more. And then when we're looking at these colors, we've got a yellow orange up here that really almost approaches Indian yellow, which we're going to look at. But those are our primaries. Now, if we move from those and we look and you go to a split primary color chart, right? So now we go to two reds, we go to two yellows and two blues, but now we get a warm, cool, warm, cool, warm, cool with each one. Then we're looking at permanent rose, and permanent rose that we just showed you, that's more of your bluish and more of your cooler red. Then we've got our Winsor lemon, right? And that's our cooler and more greenish yellow. We've got Winsor blue, and Winsor blue, that's our trade name for phthalocyanine colors, right? Really strong staining colors. Green shade is our cool blue. And then over here, now we've got Scarlet Lake, right? Much warmer. And we can see that even not having them side by side, I think we can see that with our eyes here. And also even with yellow, we can see the Winsor yellow, a warmer yellow. And then French ultramarine here, which goes more towards a reddish blue. So we get all these colors out of these six right here, which for somebody, again, if you're teaching and you're getting somebody to just start out in watercolor, there's so much, I believe, that they can learn from a small palette like this, a limited palette, and really help themselves explore color a little bit more. So that's our segue. Let's explore color. Now, I know we're beyond the brush, right? But a quick thing about brush, I'm going to use my Series 7 brush here today. Okay, so that's my Winsor Newton Series 7 brush. That's our Kolinsky Sable brush. And a lot of times when people get them, they look at them and they go, wait, that doesn't come to a beautiful point. Real quick thing. And Vicki, if you go back and spotlight me for a sec. So I'm just gonna swish my brush around here in some water. And I'm gonna do that. And I'm gonna, now if I was with you all, I would definitely have to make sure I'm not doing this towards you. I'm gonna take my brush and I'm just gonna snap it with my wrist like that. And we can go back to the overhead view here, Vicki. And just with that quick snap of the wrist, what should happen here is we get that beautiful point. everything just locks into place beautifully. So this is the brush I'm going to be using today. And if you don't know the name Series 7, this is a size 7 actually, but we call the brush a Series 7 because that's the one Queen Victoria loved. She loved, her favorite size was a 7. So we used to make that with, actually used to have a sterling silver ferrule, but we'd never be able to bring that to you today for any sort of reasonable cost if we did that. So that's not the case anymore. But let's start out by looking at two things. We're going to look at some raw materials here. So I've got a little bit of gum arabic here. Right, so gum arabic in its raw form right here. And when we look at that in its raw form, it almost looks like amber, and it's a tree resin that comes from the acacia tree. Oh, thank you. It comes from the acacia tree from the Kordofan region of places like Senegal. So, you know, when we look at our art materials, and sometimes we think there's an expensive cost, it's because a lot of materials come from far away places. But I'm going to take just one piece, put the rest of these back in here. Oh, I always do this when I do this kind of demo. I lose materials each time. I'm going to take that. I'm going to put a little bit of water on my finger. And let me show you how sticky that is. So what, 1/1000, 2/1000, there it is. And again, I can do this now because I don't have to worry about hitting any of you in the eye. So I'm going to shake a little bit vigorously here just to show you. That's still on there. That's still on there. So your gum arabic is water soluble. You'll find gum arabic on things like M&Ms, Skittles, things like that. So you do have food grade varieties, but this is your basis, your binder, of course, for your watercolor. And here we have it in our liquid form. And I'm going to put just a touch of that out. And I've got this little porcelain tray. I'm going to put a little bit, just a little bit. Oh, more than I wanted. Like I said, I go through materials here doing these things. So I'm going to do that because as we start to talk about color, I made a piece of charcoal yesterday. So I took an old Altoids tin, and I have a wood stove in my studio. That's my heat source in my studio. So I put some pieces of wood in here, just little wood chips. And I closed up the Altoid box and I just set it on the embers for about 20 minutes. And what it did, and you can make this yourself, obviously. One kind of fun thing to do is use wine corks. And I think it was on the site that I mentioned at World Pigment Day, where they have a post about this recently, and I shared it on TFAC-NA. You can, with the box closed, what you do is you're making it devoid of oxygen so that the cork, or in my case, wood chips, won't actually burn, they'll just char. So when we look at this, I've got my own piece of charcoal, which is really kind of, now, why do I like that? It's charcoal, right? And we're going to talk about, we're going to really get into color here today. But the thing I love about this is a piece of charred carbon. So when we go back to something like the Chauveau Caves, right, in France, right, was that discovered in, I think, about 1994. And the images there date back, and I'm going to put a little bit of water right in here. I think those images date back, I don't know, around 32,000 years. I don't know if I'm off by a few thousand. What does it matter when we're talking 32,000, right? But I'm going to take a little gum arabic, just a little bit, in my water. And I'm going to use that, and I can start to spread, I really dug into the paper, but I can start to spread this around. So it's a fun, yeah, there we go. Right? I'm getting really my own wash with charcoal right there. And I love the idea. I had a professor when I was in college, and I used to always say this to my students. One of the cool things that we do as artists, we make something out of nothing. So a piece of cotton rag paper, something that came from the earth, this natural element, this piece of wood that I charred myself and made, gum arabic, which comes from a tree, and water, all these natural things, we make something out of nothing. So I want you to think about that. And we're going back to our ancestors 32,000 years ago. I love that that this connects us right here. It's just awesome to me. It's, when we think about all the differences we think we have as people, man, I look at that and we don't, right? People wanted to make marks. We want to make marks. We are really seriously connected. So I want you to think about that. The next time you start to make a painting and it's not going right and you're struggling, realize you're trying to make something out of nothing. You're making magic, which is pretty cool. So if we go back to from that charred piece of carbon, it naturally for me takes us to this next. And I'm gonna dump this on my studio floor here. I get to do that here since it's my floor and not your space. I'll clean up later. I come back to this. This is my next natural thing to want to show you. And everybody knows what this is, I'm sure, right? Ochre. We've got ochre right here. So when we look at something like ochre, and we can make, it's pretty soft. So we can make a nice mark. And even I'm going to be quiet. Listen as I do this, and I'm going to press pretty hard. I don't think you hear anything, right? Just a nice way to illustrate how soft it is, that it's not dragging across the surface right there. Now, a lot of things like ochres, again, one of the earliest known pigments. So again, we go back to Chavot Cave or any of the others that we look at in art history books. You're going to see this. So this was used by humans along with red earth, white chalk, the black carbon that we just looked at. And these are forms of iron oxide. So these are obviously our earth-based pigments right there. And these days, a lot of these natural elements are depleted. I'm going to lay some of this out. This is our pan, my pan color. So tube color, pan color. Let's discuss that, since my first color I'm going to lay out is this ochre. And I'm going to put a wash of that down. Tube versus pan. A lot of times I come across people. There we go. We're letting out some color now. Come across people who will take their watercolors and they'll put it on a palette and they'll let it dry. And I get questions like, hey, Jimmy, can you do, is that okay? I've read, the internet's Wild West, right? It's like, I read you can, I read you shouldn't, I read you should. What's the case there? Can you do it? Yes. The only thing I want you to be aware of is that your pan colors are formulated to be re-wet again and again, right? Your tube colors have that cap you want to put on. You want to close that, obviously, and not let it dry out. But these are meant to be re-wet easily again and again. So when you let a piece, not a piece, but you let a swatch, a lump of your tube watercolor out, and you let that dry, it can become what we call in the art world, the art materials industry, friable. Friable, friable. And that means it's kind of hard to re-wet. It can crumble, it can crack a bit, which then if it crumbles and cracks and you have little pieces that you can't use, that's no good. And also, when you're trying to re-wet that area, but that lump of tube watercolor that you let dry, you've really got to scrub into with your brush a lot more, and that's going to beat up your brush more. So something to be aware of. And the thing we always do with our Fine Art Collective education program is we talk about sharing information like this, just so you know. I'm not going to tell you don't do that, because if laying out those colors helps you in limited time you have get more work done, then go for it. Absolutely do it. Do what you need to do to create, people, right? Because that's our goal, right? Is to make art. So and share it with others and sell it. Hopefully sell it too. So if that gets you going. But I will show you this though. I'm gonna open up.
Jimmy, what do you think about taking from the tubes and putting them in pans?
Yeah, so
will that do the same thing?
Yeah, but however, I'll show you this, Vicky. It's a good question. I'm going to show you this is actually gouache, right? Our opaque cousin to watercolor. But I have, now I work a lot in gouache. And actually in the last 4 years, just due to size, time, and everything, I get a lot of work done with gouache, and I use a very limited palette. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what I have, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Maybe I'll add another color in. And I've got my gouache in here, and I have just a little damp sponge in there. And then I put this lid on. This is actually from a company called Gorilla Painter that make pochade boxes. Some of you might be familiar with them. I could try to show you. Let me see if I can show you my pochade box here. I'm going to raise this up a little bit higher. And here's my little pochade box. So the lid, of course, opens here, right? The lid opens. And then I've got my, little easel space right here. And then this opens where I can put brushes in here. You know, I put them in there. I can put another palette here. This slides all the way open, and I got my little water carrier. I've got my rag. I've got other brushes, a little ruler, piece of charcoal. I've got, you know, my watercolors and some gouache tubes in there. And then this actually, you know, goes in here and everything goes back together. So it's kind of, you know, for me, I have a little setup like this one I just showed you for gouache. And I have a little setup like that for watercolors too. So when I go out and paint, it's like, I don't even have to think about what to grab. I just grab my kit, and yeah, there's a little more cost to that, I suppose. But again, just sort of a fun way to make sure that I've got stuff ready at the ready. And yeah, if you put a little sponge in there and you have a lid on that, you know, that should really do well, as long as you're, you know, painting pretty often. I can go a week though, if I'm working on other stuff and I come back and that's all good. And you know, any preservatives that we have in there are also keeping it fresh too. So options there. So let's take a look here. We're going to kind of move along. And Vicki, you know, anytime interrupt me if there's a question. You don't have to look for an opportune time. I do not mind. I'll just show you this. This is a piece of red ochre. So we've got red ochre right here. And let's see if I can make a mark with this. Yeah. Red ochre almost looks like a, and actually I'm going to let's lower us back down to my surface here. Red ochre there. So what happens a lot of times, and again, we make these things often from synthetic iron oxides now, because a lot of the original deposits are depleted over time, you know, so our resources are super important, of course. And when we look at that red ochre, what'll happen is you'll take your yellow ochre, right, that I just showed you before, that yellow ochre in there, and that yellow ochre gets heated. And if it has bits of hematite in it, then when it gets heated, you get this red ochre out of it as well. So you can get that change from yellow to red. And we have different varieties. When we look at red ochres, again, those are rich in the minerals hematite. So, and I don't know about you guys. I like, see if I can get that out of there. There we go. There's hematite. And you can see bits of red in there, but this mineral is quite hard. I'm not really going to get a mark out of that. That would have to get crushed down. But I love things like this. So it's the bits of hematite that are in our yellow ochre that get heated to make us a red ochre. And I like the geekiness of our Latin and Greek words. So hematite, right? Hemoglobin, hematoma, you know, fun words like, well, those aren't fun words, right? Hematoma is not exactly a fun.
Yeah, I went the wrong direction with that.
Yeah, that's bad phrasing there. This is being recorded, Vicki.
Yeah,
not
I'll
exactly
take that out.
not exactly a fun word, but I love just the geeky origins. Just a kind of a sort of side note, if you're somebody like me who likes linguistics like that and the origins of words, I love the book by Bill Bryson called Mother Tongue. Bill Bryson, and it's really the origin of our language, and kind of fun stuff. But we get hematite there. Yeah, you have to remember that next time I talk about hematite. Hematite, Jimmy, is not a fun word. Neither is hematoma, or hematoma is not. So you know that brings us along to this other one. Now, you know, I think like you, our palettes can change depending upon what you're doing and where you're going. So here is a piece of sienna. So, you know, certainly when I've been on trips, and then you can see that when I've been on trips to Italy, you gotta have some sienna on your palette. I mean, come on, you gotta have some of these earth colors right here. And we see it here in our Winsor Newton color. We see it as burnt sienna here. We've got raw as well, but I'm going to put a little burnt out. Take that brush again and just draw that down from a mass tone to an undertone, and we get that beautiful. I mean, there's our rooftops, right, in Tuscany. That's that gorgeous color that's really sort of a must for dealing with that. And you know, one thing I have here too, we don't make a color out of this, but let's see if I know you're not here with me, you're on mute, but if you could guess what that might be, what do you think that might be? My wife. What do you think, Vicky? Since you're
It's not a, is it a yellow kind of?
it's a yellow. You could ingest it. It's turmeric.
Ah, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that's a hunk of turmeric right there. And this is hard to get a color out of. You can see here, if I raise that up, it's hard to, yeah, see that? I'm barely making a mark on the surface. It's pretty dense stuff. It's not like our ochre, our carbon, our sienna. It's not like any of those.
But it does stain though, right? Turmeric, when you wet it.
Okay, so that's a good call. Highly staining color, and something, you know, when we're looking at turmeric, it's root based. So when we look at this, you boil this in water for about 30 to 45 minutes or so, and then that can be dried, and then it gets ground down, and that can be ground into a pigment. But it also has, I think it's if I say it correctly, don't quote me on this, curcumin, I think, is the it's the anti-inflammatory part of it, right? So my wife has a little bit of a bad back, so she takes a turmeric pill each day, and that kind of helps with inflammation as that gets in your system over time. And this would be the yellow that you would see in the beautiful Buddhist monks' robes. Is that turmeric, right? Really, really cool.
Color and style of your table lamp. You can select the lamp based on the features you want.
Who's that?
I don't know.
Large electronic devices.
I'm gonna buy a lamp though.
I don't think that's me.
No, I don't think so. All right, so let's move. I'm gonna, to get a clean page here, I'm gonna move over, and we're gonna look at a color that we launched in 2019. Gosh, 19. That's a different century.
I know. Feels
Isn't
like
that weird? It's still, I know we're 21 years into it, but to me, it's weird that we're in another century, right? We're supposed to be flying in our jetpacks now. So this right here, this is cool. This I actually bought from a Kremer Pigments. We're getting a nice close-up of that. And it almost looks like a piece of coral. It's super, super light. I mean, it's like holding a sponge in my hand, but it is not. It's rougher, almost like coral, but not that sharp either. And it's the color smalt. So smalt is something that goes back to Egyptian times. It's one of the first useful blues that had cobalt as an ingredient. So what happens with that, it's got sand, it's got cobalt in there and silica. And so when that gets heated, that mass, those ingredients get heated to about, I want to say it's about 2,100 Fahrenheit. It forms this glass mass, and then that can be ground into a pigment. Now, to do that, it's a huge, huge process. And if we made it in the old ways, it really would not be something that would be cost efficient, and it would just cost so much for you guys to buy it. So we make it with different pigments today, but what we try to do is we use actually PV15. So a lot of times, I'm gonna put a little smalt out. Looks like a deep, deep blue right there. Remember, it's got some cobalt in it. We'll take my brush here. I'll try to do a little drawdown for you.
So when you're speaking of blue, just a quick aside,
sure.
What's the difference between, what did you ask me, Carolyn?
French and regular ultramarine.
Okay, thank you. French ultramarine.
Oh yeah. Sure. Yeah, actually, we're gonna go right to that next. And the difference between those two, the French ultramarine tends to be is a much warmer. It's a much warmer. And I have one here as a color to show you as a finished color, but I actually have both in powdered form. So I'll show them to you and you'll see that. But our smalt here goes back to Egyptian times, and you can see that's a warmer color. I'm using some cold press paper, so you can see that, right? It's got some texture in there. You can see it pretty good right over here. You can see the texture of that cold press. But this will tend to granulate a bit more and really settle in those areas right there. So smalt is a beautiful old one right there. But again, we use what's called PV15 now. And so when you look at your tubes of color, you will see what's called a color index number, right? So some of you, I assume a lot of you, most of you are very experienced, right? Might be familiar with this. And one of the things, if I go back to ochre for just a second, you know, that's something within companies that if you have a tube of ochre from 4 different companies, you may notice 4 different shades of that color, because what we do is we buy from suppliers. So we don't make our pigments anymore. And really most companies don't do that. Some small boutique things do, companies do, but most don't do that. Again, it would drive the cost up just incredibly to do that. So we source them. And what we try to do at Winsor & Newton, we try to source them so that they are not only the most stable pigments, but that they're the ones that really match what the historical color should look like. So again, even with the professional companies, you'll notice differences in there depending on the suppliers. And I think a lot of times we think as artists that we use a lot of color, but in reality, we do not use a lot of color. The people who use a lot of color are, and I'm going to put out a little French ultramarine for you right here, and we'll compare that to smalt. In the mass tone right away, it looks pretty similar, right? It almost looks like a dense bluish black, right?
Yeah.
So when we look at, let's draw this color down.
So we have a word that we use, it's called flocculating.
Yeah, flocculating. Yeah, flocculating is like an exaggerated form of granulation. And what happens with flocculation, and well, both granulation and flocculation, those two are predicated upon that size of the pigment. So the larger particle sizes in pigments will settle in the hollows of the paper. And you were looking at our French ultramarine right here, and you can notice that right away.
Oh yeah,
there you go.
yeah.
Yeah, you really start to see it, right? Which again, a lot of times, this is to me one of your super key things in talking about color when you're first teaching, you know, beginners watercolor, because we get calls sometimes at the company on our tech line, and somebody says, "There's something wrong with my color. It's all, you know, it's all over." I'm like, no, that's a beautiful, desirable thing. Well, depending on what you're doing, you know, maybe it's not desirable, but if we don't know that when you're using a color, you lose that. But, you know, originally, and this is a beauty, this chunk I have right here, this also came from Kremer Pigments. That's our lapis. That's a nice chunk of lapis. Look at how gorgeous that is, our semi-precious stone. You can see all the little different veins in there. Right. So what happens with that is that gets ground up. Now, you know, we don't use actual lapis stones. Again, boy, this drives up the price. When you go back and you look at, I don't know who, Fra Angelico, Raphael, people like that, this blue would have been worth its weight in gold at one time. And it was so precious. And I love the name, you know, lapis gives us that color ultramarine. So ultra, beyond, marine, the sea, because in Northern Europe, they were getting that from beyond the sea. Some of the greatest sources of lapis would have been in Afghanistan. So it's beyond the sea, it was far away. I love that etymology there that goes with that. And when we look at this, what would happen with that is that would get ground down, and you can actually see it in the container here. See all the little bits of impurities in there. And once again, you can look on YouTube, and I'll open this up. There you go. You can see that a little better. You can see different impurities in there. And if you look up like actually making ultramarine from lapis, I think they have pictures on the Kremer site. I keep mentioning that, but also, you know, also other places you can see it. And what would happen is this would get crushed up. And then that would get crushed further on down, and then they would take wax and water and knead this combination in wax and water, and the wax would pull out the impurities, and then you would get this, you know, distillation. And what you would actually have from there is you would get your there we go. You get your ultramarine, right? Beautiful color.
Yeah.
But interesting though, because that color is going to be something that in watercolor, beautiful color, in oil sometimes it doesn't sing quite as much. You know, so when we look at our watercolors compared to oils, we're talking about the same pigment, but we're talking about different binders. So gum arabic to possibly linseed or whatever. And you get different ways that the light refracts from there. But let's compare that to our French ultramarine. Let's see if I have, there we go. It's going to be a much different, right? Much different blue. I mean, drastically different right there. And, you know, and why do we have, why do we have that name when we're talking about our color and we talk about ultramarine? We're going back to the 1800s, and there was a competition, I believe it was about 1829, to try to make a synthetic version of our genuine ultramarine. So that it was more affordable. And that was a French committee who started that competition. And the winner of that was a French person. His name was Gamboge. And so we get French ultramarine. So I like to joke, if it was a guy named O'Shaughnessy who won it, we'd have Irish ultramarine. I don't know how true that would be, but my dorky little joke there. Let's continue with blues though for a kick right here, and we'll take a totally different one. Again, this really almost appears black in mass tone. We get that up there, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, again.
I mean, you can, I get that in the light. You can pick out some of the blue. Mass tone. It's really hard to see, but that almost looks totally black. So let's take this one, and I'll tell you what it is in a sec. Oh, look how now. First of all, before I even tell you what it is, look how powerful it is. Right, this is where you start to play and you realize just how powerful a color is. Now I pull it down more. What does that look like that you guys, I don't know, some of you may be wearing?
Blue?
No, it's you might be.
Indigo?
There you go. Yeah, I was going to say you might be wearing something that's this color right now. Yeah, you get indigo. So you get indigo. And when we look at indigo, this is also something here. This is a compressed plant, Indigo tinctorum. And let's jot that down here, that we're looking at indigo. So indigo, over time would have been quite expensive too. It was used as a dye. And you can see how hard it is. It's like digging into the paper. It'll leave, right? It'll leave color there, but it's really digging into the paper, right? And indigo would have been used as a dye, certainly in our blue jeans, right? Certainly when we get into the 1800s, its popularity skyrocketed. But it would be a dye. And one thing I want to point out to you, dyes versus pigments. So when we talk about dyes, dyes are something that is, and Vicki, for this, you can kind of come back to me for a second since I'm not doing anything visual. When we talk about dyes, what we're talking about is a color that is soluble in water. So I want you to think about a dye. Think about putting, sugar in your tea or sugar in your coffee, right? It's going to totally dissolve and be absorbed by that water and dissolve and be part of the solution. Where your pigments don't do that. Your pigments are not soluble in water or oil. What your pigments do is they are suspended in a solution. So whether we're talking about gum arabic, or we're talking about linseed oil, or we're talking about acrylic polymer, your pigments are not soluble and they're suspended in that solution right there. Now, the gum arabic, the binder of gum arabic and watercolor, is soluble with water, but the pigment itself is not. And often what that means is the pigment itself is going to be more light fast. And I don't know if I have it here.
So would you add gum arabic to an existing paint that you use? And if you would, why would you do that?
Yeah, you could certainly. Well, there's a few reasons why you might do that. So you might have you can go back the overhead view here, Vicki. What you might do is, if you have your water, I've got a cup over to the side, but just for our sake here, if I have water like this, I might put a few drops of gum arabic in there. And what that's going to do, and again, this depends on you as an artist and your sense of, first of all, your aesthetics and your sensibilities and your relationship with the materials. But water is going to evaporate quickly. You know that, right? Obviously, there's no big news flash there. So our gum arabic, our addition to that, makes that dry a little bit slower, so it can make blending a little bit easier. And then the other thing it can do as well is stop the spread of water so much. So if you're somebody, again, especially if you're teaching, I'll put a little bit of water in this well. Okay, and I'm going to take, let's take the indigo. I'll pick up some since I've got a pile of it here. I'm going to make our solution there. And I'm going to, let's see, I think what I'll do, so I'll move this over and I'll make 2 circles there. And what I'll do here is I'm going to take a little bit of water as well. I'm going to put a drop of gum arabic in. I say a drop. I'm going to try a drop. You don't want, I say just a few drops because, see if I can do that. Oh, there we go. That's not bad. I do that because if you use a lot of gum arabic, it can get your watercolor to look very glossy. It can also make it a little bit more brittle. And obviously those are 2 things. And the glossy, you know, here nor there aesthetics, although that's not something we normally think of with our watercolors. And I'm going to put some of that indigo over here. So I've got indigo over here just with water. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to put that in this, you know, circle here. Okay, and that's fine. I have a really light solution of that. That's actually looks like your faded, looks like your 80s stonewashed jeans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to take a little bit of my indigo and I'm going to pick up a little of that solution that has the down here at the bottom that's got my gum arabic in there. And what happens?
Stops it from spreading.
Yeah, stops it from spreading as much. I really have to kind of push it around a lot more. So even if I take, you know, another color, let's take a color or something that's going to contrast a whole lot more. I haven't gotten to this one yet. This is Indian yellow that I'm gonna pick up here. I know you can't see it for a second, but hold on. You know, when we, you know, run that there, that's gonna bleed into it pretty easily.
So I got a question here. Is it gum arabic that collects at the opening of the tube of paint, especially a new tube? And does this affect the remainder of the paint in the tube?
Yeah, sometimes that can happen. You'll notice that possibly happening too with oil color as well. Yeah. And that would be your linseed oil migrating there. And that's something that can happen if they're sitting for quite a long time. No, it doesn't normally affect that unless you know you start squeezing out paint, you notice the whole tube is dried out. But the amount that you often see there looks like a whole lot more than it would than it actually is. Okay. So depending on how much you push the color, it's still going to spread, right? You're doing wet on wet, so it's still going to spread in into there. But your spread, you know, here we have a much stronger relationship of color there. That's really, if I tried to thin this out, is really going to, you know, infect that color a little bit more. And I'm starting to get a greener mixture. Here, it's kind of sitting there more as just yellow and not infecting the color as much. So it's going to stop the spread a little bit more than if you did not have it. And of course, it would be your ingredient if you were, you know, if you did want to make your own, you know, make your own color. Let's take a look. Let's hop over to the reds here because I'm mindful of time. And
another quick question: if you make paint from dry pigment, do you use water with gum arabic or do you use gum arabic alone? So if you
it would be it would be water with gum arabic and usually a bit of glycerin in there as well, which acts as a wetting agent.
Okay.
For sure. So this is a color that we call Carmine, permanent Carmine. Permanent is an interesting word, right? So when we talk about that word, you know, when we talk about the word permanent, what's important there is to, you know, we think of it as permanence and light fastness. So when we buy pigments from manufacturers, and like I think I didn't continue that thought before. When I was talking about pigments, we buy from suppliers, right? So the people who use the most colors, most pigments, are industrial coatings, automotive industry. We're really the beneficiary of those. So sometimes a color gets discontinued because it's discontinued in the industry and we can't get it as a byproduct of that. So sometimes that happens.
It happened to gouache. I'm not gouache, Gamboge, right?
Well, oh, so that's an interesting one. Yeah, yeah, Gamboge, we now call New Gamboge. And Gamboge actually came from, boy, so if you go on the Winsor and Newton website and search articles, there's all sorts of articles about color. We do these beautiful series called Spotlight on Color.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah. Okay. So there is one on Gamboge because it's a lengthy story for me to tell here.
Okay.
But that originally came from a plant. It came from Cambodia. And if you think of the history of Cambodia and the killing fields, it came from a region like that. So first of all, it's very hard to get. There's also a poison element to that original plant as well. Then there was a synthetic version of that, but then that was discontinued. So now we make another one called New Gamboge, which is trying to mimic the original. But yeah, that happens over time. But when we talk about light fastness, we're talking about the ability of a color to be able to withstand UV light, right? UV light. How can it hold up to UV light? And when we're talking about permanence, we're talking about how does it hold up, not just with UV light, but with the paper that it's put on, within the environment in which it's hung, the conditions in which we have that color. So that's a very important distinction there. So when we, as Winsor and Newton, let's see if I can find a tube and show you this. Yeah, here we go. This might be a little tricky to see. I'm going to point. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it says permanence A. So permanence A. So our light fastness rating comes from the supplier, but then we do our own test. And a permanence A means that if that's hung, if it's matted, it's behind glass, it's not hung in sunlight, right? It's in a stable condition inside, where you would normally hang a watercolor. In 100 years, you're not going to see a change to that color. And a lot of times people think change with light fastness is about fading. It's not about fading all the time. Certainly, that's a major component, but it's about a change in color. It's about sometimes a darkening of a hue, losing some of its intensity in part of a range. So you might have an orange that's not light fast and loses its intensity. And I was talking about dyes and pigments before. Just know that when you talk about dyes in other forms of paint, it's not about the professional nature of the company. The nature of dye itself, no matter who makes it and no matter how careful they are to make it into a paint, a dye is more susceptible to the degradation from UV light, right? So it's a long story short, it's the nature of the beast. And our pigments can more withstand that. But again, we do our testing in the lab. We actually put our paint in it's like this oven, and we slide swatches in, and it's called a Q-Sun machine. And they do that for about 300 hours. And it's actually calibrated to the sunlight in Ohio, right about the middle of the country. Oh. Yeah. And they put it in there. And that, and this is a longer topic. Some of you may be familiar with, but a blue wool test. A blue wool test was an original test for dyers, and they would actually use a blue color. And it has 8 steps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if it's down in the 1 range, that's going to fade. And in the 8 range or above, that's going to be extremely light fast. So we still, in an art materials industry, we test our colors against the blue wool scale. It has to match that. So something like the one I just showed you, that Winsor lemon that has the permanence rating of A, that's going to be up there at 8 on the blue wool scale. And that means in 100 years, you're not going to see a change. If you see a B, there are some in our color range that are a B. And I'm going to show you that in just a second, right? There's very few, very few, but a lot of times that's for historical reasons and people still love the color. But let's go back to this one for a second. This is called Permanent Carmine. And originally this color came from this source right here. And this, I'm going to grab a piece of scrap paper. Yeah, I got a piece of scrap watercolor paper right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little of this out. This is cochineal beetles. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of cochineal, but these are insects that would attach themselves to plants in South America, cactus plants. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to move this out of the way. And I'm going to fold this over. So these are cochineal beetles, and they're dried. And I'm going to take, let's see, I'm going to take a palette knife here. You're going to hear some crunching as I grind. Okay, if I open that up, we should start to see some red color in there. It's deep, but right now I'm going to crush this up a little bit more. Now you would have to take tens of thousands of these to make a very small amount of color, and it's not particularly light fast. So the permanent carmine we have today, permanent, the name permanent carmine is much more permanent. But I just want to show you this because there we go. Look at that color now come out.
Yeah.
Now watch this. Let's do this. I'm gonna dump in my, and let's take the other end of my brush. You can see it already, but fruit juice. There you go. Look at that. Look at that beauty of a color right there. So that's actually what's known in the food industry as color E120. So I don't even know if do they make cherry Coke anymore? I have no idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, cherry Coke. This is just crushed up in here. I'm not, and it's very diluted in water, so you're not going to see a ton of color coming out of that, even though it looks very rich right here. But things that you see in a store. So when you've got that yogurt that's got the, more than likely, fake fruit in it, they'll add E120 often. What else? Lipstick. So makeup industry, that Gatorade, whatever, those kind of things will use E120. So years ago, when I was still teaching in the college, I was on my way in the morning, and I had the news on, and it was one of those teasers for, they want you to stay, right? They didn't want you to turn the dial, and they said, "Are there bugs in your Starbucks passion fruit tea?" Yeah, it's like, oh, I have to hear. Are there bugs? Well, no, it's a thing. Somebody found out, but it was nothing that was hidden to begin with. But it's, what do they call it now on the internet? It's clickbait, right? It's like, well, I got to find out, and you think the story is going to be that there's some disgusting, horrible thing happening. But it's a common thing, just like our gum arabic. So there's a lot of kind of food associations, but I'm going to show you this funky one. And I'm mindful of time here. There's so much more I could go into.
I know this could go. We'd all probably sit here forever too watching you.
So I'm not
we need a part two.
Yeah, I'm going to show you this one, and then I'm not up against a time crunch. So if you do, I can go on a little bit more, but I'll show you this.
No, we're fine. People will stay on for another 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to show you this. This is the craziest thing about color to me. It is the food associations, right? Who's the first person who ate a lobster? Somebody who was really hungry, right? Because you don't look at a lobster and say, boy, does that look tasty, right? You don't even look at an egg or a chicken or anything like that and think that looks tasty. You do look at a strawberry and think that, and it smells wonderful. Fruit, things like that are so aromatic. So color is the same to me, where I look and I go, who first? And it's probably the fact that they broke something open. And so when you look in this and you break beyond this bark, this is what's called a madder root. So this is one of our most famous colors from Winsor Newton. Rose madder. There you go. Rose madder. So that's a nice hunk of root right there. And then I have, let's see here if I can show you. I've got more little twigs, and you can kind of see the end of that. Let's get that in focus. You can see the end of that, right? But still, nothing crazy, right? Nothing crazy. But then it gets ground down. And that is just, man, that's a stunner right there. So we get that. And rose madder is a B rating. So it's about, let's find my rose madder. Here we go. Here's my rose madder.
I have a quick question about opera rose.
Yeah.
So everybody talks about, that as a phantom color.
Yeah. Opera Rose is right here. I actually made a little card to show all you guys of our kind of pink red range, being a botanical
So that
group.
you have noted as a B, that's why, okay.
Have that noted as a B. Yeah. So when we look at our reds here, yeah, we have a B over here, and we've got Opera Rose, which is also a B, and the rest will be in the A range. There's an AB there because alizarin would have been B. Your permanent alizarin is an A. Yeah, so B is going to get in that 50 to 75 year range or so. And again, these are things we shoot for the upper level, right, on permanence, but then we have things that have been of historical interest for people. So personally, I don't freak out about things like that because, again, I'm matting it, I'm framing it. It's not sitting in a window. I'm not hanging it in a bathroom. I'm not putting it in places where it's going to be subject to taking on moisture, releasing moisture, taking on cold, releasing cold, and getting beat with sunlight. And oftentimes too, you're also mixing with something else, which mitigates that a bit. I'm careful with that. Yeah, so those kind of come into play, but that gives you kind of a nice range of some of the reds and pinks that are favored a lot of times by people in the botanical arts. And so we'll look at a little bit of that here. Let me spread this out. So here's our rose madder. So a madder root. Oh, I got really jammed up with my writing there. Okay, so we're going to take some of that. And that's a beautiful, just rich color right there, really. And let's take, since I have it here, let's take a little of that French ultramarine. I got a rose mat, I got a root in there. And let's drop that in. This is the kind of thing too, I always think, when you're teaching with students, is to have these just color explorations and let something bleed. And pardon me while I, and let that just kind of, that the beauty of watercolor to me is letting it do its thing a bit. Just personally with me anyway, and this is obviously, as as artists, not right or wrong, just aesthetics and difference. But I like to let go a little bit and let it move. Water does what water wants to do, and water wants to move, and I think that's part of the beauty of it. And let's just look on the other side. We did French Ultra. Let's see what happens when we take some smalt here on the other side.
We can get smalt now.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, smalt came out in 2019. And smalt's going to give us we put some of that in. It's going to give us a deeper variation of that violet right there. So you can really, that combination of smalt and rose madder is a really lovely one. And I'll show you two greens here, and then I'll show you just some few mixes that I like. So this is Buckthorn Berries. And ripe buckthorn berries, which don't look like much. It actually, looks like when the rabbits get on my lawn.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Doesn't look too great. Doesn't look too great. That's buckthorn berries, and that would have been your origin for Sap Green. And again, not super stable. So I show you these things as fun origins of colors, but this is our permanent Sap Green. And permanent Sap Green.
We lost your, hold on for a minute.
Oh, you lost me?
No, I lost your phone spotlight. There you go.
I'll be back. Oh, there we go. Oh, let me rotate it. I think somebody was trying to call. So
yeah, that'll do it. Yeah.
Yeah, let me rotate here. There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Stop calling me.
Sap Green is another one that between the different manufacturers can be fairly significant.
It can. It's a green that moves more towards a yellow green. And actually, what I'm going to do? I'm going to pull this page off because I want to show you something with that. A favorite color of mine and a nice mix. So let me take that Sap Green. Okay, put some of that on there, and let me just draw it down. And I love Sap Green along with, this is Indian Yellow.
Yeah, I like Indian Yellow. Yeah.
Oh man, I refer to Indian Yellow as sunshine in a tube. It's a lovely color. it's just, I mean, that's just, whoa, man, right? I didn't have a word for it.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty one.
Right. And, you know, to me, that's that sunlight hitting a leaf. And you can get that beautiful, beautiful combination of those two colors right there. So when we look at that permanent sap green, that's, you know, that's what we call an organic synthetic. So when you look at colors, a lot of times you look at something like a cobalt and a cadmium. Those are inorganic, right? They're metals. They were never alive. Cobalt, never alive, not a carbon-based form. And those are the ones that tend to be the inorganics tend to be more opaque. They tend to have a bigger pigment particle size, and your inorganic colors. And this is a good way to think about it. When you look at the names that are really hard to say, phthalocyanine, quinacridone, benzomidazolone, dioxazine, those are all petroleum based, so they are all organic, right? They were flora and fauna that's been compressed over, you know, millennia, the millions of years.
Okay.
And so those are the sources. Those organic sources are where we get those long names, and those are synthesized in a lab. The easier ones to say that are, you know, ochre, sienna that we looked at, cobalt, cadmium, and such are inorganic. So kind of different with those two, just to kind of, you know, think about when you see those big long names, the multisyllabic hard ones to say.
Those are organic.
Are organic, okay. Right? The easier one, and I'm generalizing a little bit, but the easier ones to say, yeah, fall into the inorganic. Now, and just to go back to rose madder for a second, you know, like I said, a lot of times we make things based on more permanent recipes. Now, we still make this from the original recipe. There was a colorman associated with Winsor Newton called George Field, and we still make it with the same exact process. And I think, don't quote me on this exactly, I think it takes about 13 weeks to make a bash. It's a very long process, which is why it's more expensive. And if I was with you right now, it's the one color I would say, smell this. You need to smell this. It smells like bergamot. So right, yeah, so like an Earl,
like to get in a candle. Yeah.
Or like Earl Grey tea has bergamot.
Wow. Okay.
Right. And I asked our lab at one point, I said to them, because we have as something came up about that. It was early on when I was with the company. I was like, wow, this smells gorgeous. Like, what's up with this? And they said it's lost to history why bergamot was in there. They said in the original recipe, there might have been an off-putting smell that they added it in. So it's still there, but it's really sort of lost to history. But it's, so if any of you have a rose madder tube and you've never really
smell it, yeah,
give it a little smell. Here's another green. This is Terra Vert.
Oh, I like that one too. Yeah.
Green earth has a very low tinting strength. It's not super strong, but in your you're right. But in the botanical arts can be just a beautiful, cool green. And you know, the origin of that would have been your mineral celadonite and whoops, I dropped that. And glauconite would have been our original sources of that. You know, back in the day. So that would have been different. I'm going to show you two more combinations of colors.
What do you think of the color charts that you guys have, though? Dot charts, or those are, you still make those? Yeah, I have.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
And those have all of the colors on them.
They do. Yeah, they do. And also if you go on the website, the nice thing about the watercolor section on the website is you can click on each color. You can see its light fastness and permanent rating. You can see whether it's a staining color or a granulating color. What else is on there? A lot of information, all the real specifics. So you just click on each color.
Okay.
So I'm showing you here brown madder. So we went from rose madder to brown madder. I'm just going to lay some of that out. And brown madder is, and both cobalt blue deep is the next one here, are really nice granulators. So let me take that one down. Let me take down cobalt blue deep. So cobalt blue deep really tends to granulate. And the brown madder tends to stain a little bit more. And I'm going to bring those two together. and they form a really, if I take a little bit more blue, they form a very muted violet,
Oh, yeah.
which,
Yeah.
you know, and they start to kind of halo together as they dry. And well, you go, wow, you can really see, look at that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I like this, you know, sort of in the natural world. To me, that's a fun mix for, you know, rocks, anything like that. You know, as I kind of like I was mentioning before, rocks, pavement, anything, you know, even I don't know if you're painting something in their soil, anything like that. It's a really nice, beautiful color combination. That's cobalt blue deep and brown madder. And then since we have our Indian yellow, let's take that rose madder out again. And I'll put a drop of that down. And I'm going to mix rose madder with Indian yellow. These are all kind of color combinations that sometimes I don't think people really, you know, think about. We do a lot of playing in our education program. I'm going to make that a little bit deeper. We do a lot of playing. And
Can you move the paper over to
oh
your?
yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, good call. Yeah, we do a lot of, you know, a lot of play. A lot of times what happens is my guys on our education team will go out and do demos and things. And then they're like, wow, I just combined these today. Look how beautiful these are. This almost, you know, this becomes a much deeper, beautiful, rich orange. I just love the depth to that. It's super rich. They're both very transparent and that gives them this really clean, rich, deep color and really beautiful. I mean, as this starts to dry, the terra vert right there, really a beautiful combination against that, right? It's all about our, you know, not just our opaque and transparent, but our warms, our cools. And the last few things as we finish up, I want to show you here. And then I can, you know, I can take some other questions and things like that. I'm happy to do that. So these are what we refer to, we came out in 2019, we came out with our cadmium-free colors. So cadmiums are heavy metals, right? We know that they're heavy metals. They're actually a very whitish metal that gets mined from the ground, and through a heating process, you get yellows and oranges and reds. And we were actually the first as a company to come out in the 1854 Crystal Palace exhibition in London. We came out with our Aurora Yellow, which was the first cadmium yellow. That was the first time it was commercially available. And so what we did in 2019 is we came out with our cadmium-free colors. And I just kind of made a little color chart. So we've got lemon, yellow pale, yellow deep, which actually looks like an orange until we really get it next to a pure orange. We've got scarlet red and red deep. And what we did with these colors is the brief history of this for you is that if we go back to about 2015-ish right now, 2014, 2015, there was a proposed ban in the EU against cadmiums. And they have been banned in other industries as a heavy metal. And what happened is that ban never happened because a lot of artists really were up in arms. They said, we barely use anything. If you really think about sources of cadmium, nickel cadmium batteries, things like that are, you know, way more prolific than a bunch of us artists splashing around color, right? So it, you know, and it's in such small quantities. And also in the cadmiums, it's in small quantities, insoluble in the human body. So we didn't get rid of them, but we were already on a track of making cadmium free for anybody who just said, just like with diet or anything else, said, you know what, I just want heavy metals off my palette. So we did blind tests with a bunch of artists and myself, and we were able to benchmark these and match them exact to our cadmium colors. So if you're somebody who wants to get cadmiums off your palette, we've got cadmium free now. And it was also something, you know, down the road, will we get rid of cadmiums? I don't know. I can't say that. That's not something I can say right now. But it also means that the more cadmium free we sell as opposed to cadmium, it's less of those raw materials that the people who make the paint actually deal with as well. It's less stuff that you have to deal with treating water. So it's just kind of a sustainability journey that we've started to take. And the other two colors, and I'll bring my sheet back here. The other colors we came out with in 2019, aside from the cadmium free, were the smalt that we looked at. And then also this one, aqua green, which was availability of a new pigment source. And what we do with that, look at this aqua green.
Oh, that's pretty.
That's a pretty one. As a matter of fact, I'm going to drop a little of that Indian yellow in there.
Oh, oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a beauty. Let's get that requires a close up. Oh, I like that. I always love to let it trail a little bit. Yes, I just saw Tara says, what is the pigment in aqua green? I have it and the pigment isn't listed. Yeah, that's a good question. The reason it's not listed on that, Tara, is because, as I mentioned before, it's relatively new. We buy from a pigment supplier and it's proprietary to them, so they won't share that with us right now. So we actually, and you'll notice that on our cadmium free colors as well. And our cadmium free colors, that's actually us, because we were first to market with cadmium free and we just launched cadmium free with oil. So we haven't shared that pigment information yet. But what I can tell you about the cadmium free colors, when we're looking at those, remember I mentioned genuine cadmium, the heavy metal, is inorganic. It's a metal, wasn't alive, right? So what you find is, if you look, what do the impressions love about, yeah, that was aqua green right here. I'm gonna jot that down. I saw that question just come in. Aqua green. The hallmarks of genuine heavy metal, cadmiums in the 1800s that the Impressionists loved so much. High saturation, strong color, very opaque. And when you grade them down, when you mix them with other colors, they more aptly would describe natural light, that more cool bluish natural light. So you get that from cadmium. So that's all the testing that we did with these as well, was not just mass tone, is how they would mix. But here's the deal. We found out, I'm taking credit, I didn't find out, our chemists found out that if they used an organic pigment, they got one characteristic, like, let's say, the opacity, but they didn't get the color saturation or the mixing properties. If they used an inorganic pigment, they vice versa, right? They got one property, but not the other. So they actually use two pigments in the cadmium freeze. They use an inorganic and an organic to match all the properties of a genuine, right? And this other color that I just put out that we launched in 2019, aside from aqua green and smalt, is, oh, here it is, cobalt green deep. And let's take a look at that.
I have a question here about how long does a tube typically last before pigment breaks down? And is there a recommendation for storage? Well, that's
yeah. So pigment itself, pigment doesn't break down, right? It doesn't break down. What we say about storage and shelf life, if you want to call it shelf life, we're a little bit hesitant, but if pinned down, we'll say about 7 to 10 years unopened. And now here's why I say we're hesitant. I have tubes of paint that are 20, 30 years old, and they're absolutely fine. The issue with the paint is when somebody opens it, you don't know how long it's been stored. So sometimes on our tech line, somebody will say, my paint's drying out. The first question our tech line person will say was, are you closing the tube after every use? Yeah, absolutely. I'm closing it after every use. Okay, but then it's a little bit of a detective thing here. But have you left it open while you're painting? And it's like, well, it's been open, for 2 hours while I was painting, but I closed it after use. Now do that 5 times. Now it's been open for 10 hours. So things can dry out. And also, where are they storing it? We do storage tests. So we take the product and we actually freeze it. When we come out with a new color, we do stability tests and storage tests and shipping tests. Like, how do they handle? So we want to know, if a truck breaks down with our paints in Wisconsin in the middle of winter, is that going to be okay?
Right.
So if you leave your paint in the car and it freezes today, don't freak out. It's going to be okay. But also don't stick it in the microwave. Don't heat it in a pot of boiling water. Just and I say that because we've had people
do it, right?
Yeah, it's not, I don't make it up, or I don't.
I know,
We've had people call up because they were concerned about the fact after the fact that they tattooed themselves with our ink. That's a true That's a true story. Yeah. So so my point being is we do freeze thaw tests. We do 20 freeze thaw tests. So we freeze the paint the next morning, comes out of the freezer. It's let all day to come back to room temperature, and then we do that 20 times to freeze thaw, freeze thaw, freeze thaw. So that's why it's hard to put an exact shelf. It's not milk or yogurt or. So I don't think I really answered it, but I'm not trying to skirt around it. It's just, it's funky.
There's no definite fact.
Yeah.
Here you
Yeah.
I mean, I have some that are over 10 years old, and
yeah.
if I go into it and they're fine, if it's if I don't have any others, I just use it. So
yeah, and that's the thing too. People will ask, like, listen, if it you're making artwork, right? You're putting your heart and soul into stuff, and you're putting your time into it. So just use a little bit of common sense with things. Certainly if you open it up and something smells funky, right, or it's chunky or weird, you know what it's supposed to be like. So if it's off in weird ways, we do sometimes get people calling us and they're like, yeah, but I thought I'd try it. And ultimately, I get it. Art materials are expensive, right? I want a value. I don't want to throw my money away. But
happens.
It's kind of like when somebody in the household says, here, taste this milk. And I'm like, listen, if you're asking me to taste it,
they don't want it. I did that to my husband with chicken, and he looks at me and goes, no, we're not eating it now.
No, you're right. I'm not going to be the guinea pig. I want to have a good night's sleep, right?
Yeah, I don't want to have it now. So
yeah, same thing with your art supplies.
Speaking of a smell, so there are other brands that use some type of organic binder, like Manuka, honey, and so what do you think about mixing other brands with your brand?
Yeah. I've talked to the chemists about this, and the reason we don't use honey in there is its ability to possibly go off, and glycerin has served the purpose and works well. The thing I can say about brands is the art materials industry is a real small industry, and when there are trade shows, I see people and all the professional companies. You get to know them. And there are a lot of good people who are trying to make really great products. And there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of integrity, because what you see in art materials companies is artists working in them and artists running them a lot of times. So there's a great deal of integrity, I can say. And if you're buying professional art materials, you're probably getting really good stuff. And part of it is you do get what you pay for.
Right.
Now, all that said, in talking to our chemists, they're like, we'll do tests and we'll benchmark against our own products when we come out with a new product. So the cadmium free against the cadmium, and we'll benchmark against competition out there. And we personally haven't seen any difference in our test of the glycerin to the honey. So you sort of have to take that for what it's worth. Now, mixing things, listen, I could put the company hat on and tell you what we like and have all the ones, right? But we have toolboxes, right? We're artists. I've never thought about art as a really overly cerebral thing, and I think that's because I come from a father who owned a gas station when I was a kid. It kind of goes back to me starting this conversation with you. We are putting mud down on paper, right? We're making something out of nothing with raw elements. So this act of painting to me is almost more of a blue collar and trial and error and such. So the reason I say that is because we have toolboxes, just like carpenters, and we might have different things in those toolboxes. And mixing colors, you mix one professional with another, you should not have any problem there. I think I would say this, and it doesn't apply to watercolor. I would, well, no, it could. I mean, you go to the cheapest brands of watercolor, and it's a tube for $2. Yeah, those are where you're probably, I think of the extreme of that when we go back to being little kids and you had the plastic tray with the little ovals, right? And
yeah.
They cracked, crumbled, you had a brush and all the hairs went this way. To me, watercolor is the most intimate form of all the painting media. Because your color doesn't just sit on a surface like oil and acrylic. It becomes part of the surface.
Exactly.
And for those of you who are teaching, and actually, Vicki, you can come back here since I'm not showing anything for a second. I'll kind of end up with this, and then I'll field any more questions that we might have. I would say this: if you're teaching people too, and they're on a budget, right? Artists, we're all on a budget, right? if you're teaching people and they're on a budget, what I always say when I'm talking in demos like this is I say to students, if you're trying to save money, buy the best quality paper and buy the student grade paints. Our student grade paints are called Cotman. They come from the name of the artist John Sell Cotman back in the 1800s. And they're really good paints. They're a really high quality student level paint. But, you know, this is extreme, but imagine trying to make a watercolor painting on a piece of copy paper. Forget it, right? It's going to be, you're just going to fight you have the best paint in the world. Doesn't matter. You are going to fight it. So a good quality watercolor paper and a good quality brush, if you're a student just starting out, I always say invest it there. And then I say later on, we all want to aspire to something better, right? So then I say, aspire to the professional range with your series 1 first, because if we go back to yellow ochre where we started is a series 1. It's your cheaper paint as opposed to a 3, 4, 5. More expensive pigments, more involved the process of manufacturing, right? All that, just like any product. And but the difference is in a series 1 student grade to a series 1 professional, there isn't a massive jump in cost usually with that, right? It's not as big as a more expensive paint.
Right.
So that's where people, I think, can aspire and make that transition. And what do you get? You get, you know, when you're talking about student versus professional grade color, it basically comes down to 2 or 3 things. The breadth of the range. So in a professional range of colors, we might have 120 colors. The student range, I forget what it is with Cotman, but maybe it's 60 or whatever. So you've got more colors in the range. That's one. You've got more genuine versus hue colors. And a hue, right? What does hue mean? It's just synonymous for color. Hue doesn't mean that something's inferior. It just means it's not using the genuine article in it. So we can offer it at a less price. And the biggest thing between student and professional is really pigment load. And there's a little bit of a misnomer there. You know, pigment load has a point where there's diminishing returns. So it's like baking a cake, right? You can't just say, well, I'm going to put like 5 pounds of flour in my cake, right? It's going to get so thick. It's the consistency is going to be off and it's not going to work. It's also not going to taste great, right? So when pigment load, it's not like, oh, we're just going to load it with every, you know, we load it with the most pigment we can.
It doesn't,
without without destroying the integrity, the viscosity, and things like that. I will tell you with this, because I'm just so in love with gouache and you know what I do with that. Like, you know, this is just, if you go back to overhead view, you know, I really favor super bold color. So I'm a big fan of gouache. And in that, gouache, to reach its opacity, has a higher pigment load in there than the watercolors. Pigment to binder ratio. So still gum Arabic binder, but higher pigment to binder ratio. So if you are working with gouache, you want to be careful about getting too thick with that. Your layer's too thick, otherwise you'll get that cracking that you might notice. But you know, you can get these beautiful, gorgeous, you know, passages of color in gouache. And you know, and sometimes I'll use, you know, gouache and watercolor together. Yeah. So any, boy, there was so much there. Is there any final questions from people as we wind this down? Anybody want to ask Jimmy a question? Yeah. Fire, if you have it, you can go off mute and, you know, fire away. And, you know, Vicky shared that, but I'll put that back there as well.
Okay.
So can I ask a question, Vicky?
Yeah.
Yeah, go.
Hi, Jimmy. So I'm Deborah, and Winsor Newton used to make these beautifully hand-colored color charts. Yeah. And I've asked about them, but I was told that this is a few years ago, that they're no longer made.
Yeah. So we as Vicky said, what we do still have is the dot cards. So you can actually lay out the colors. So they have little tiny dots of color, and you can actually lay them all out yourself. Part of it, I can be really blunt with you, Deborah, is that I think the cost of those handmade cards, you know, and having it all laid out was so unbelievably cost prohibitive. I think was one of the issues with that, but that's kind of dates before my time, so I can't 100% speak to it. But the dot cards will give you that, and just requires you kind of putting down some, you know, some water.
That's nice to know. Thank you. I'll make my own.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Anybody else have a question?
Yeah, fire away if you do. I enjoy the questions. They're fun. And like I said, I'll mention you again, there's other stuff going on. So we'll do some watercolor stuff, but we also do oil, acrylic. I'm doing a gouache tomorrow, so I'll still be talking about watercolor as well in our live stream. So you can see that all in our feed. And we also do some giveaways there, which is kind of fun too. So, but any other questions for me? Oh yeah, let's see.
Everybody is just thrilled with this, Jimmy. We got to do it again. There's got to be a part 2 on this because
good.
for us,
yes, a lot of stuff.
I mean,
right?
obviously artists in general, the color is important, but when we paint, and I should have Sarah on this because she's one of our teachers. When we paint botanical art, we tend to be very concerned about matching and about trying to get the right shades together. I mean, green is something I've been working on for the last month because I'm painting something that's all green, but you have, 5 different variations of green and what really works and what doesn't. So this is unbelievably helpful for us. I do have, so somebody said, not a question, but would love Winsor Newton to put their pro hot press paper in wire-bound journals. Is that potentially?
Oh, well, maybe. And the reason I say maybe is just be on the lookout. We're going to be relaunching paper this year. And I don't know, although I work in the marketing department, I'm not tied super closely to every single thing, but we're relaunching paper this year. And yeah, kind of keep an eye out. That might be part of it for sure.
Okay. And we talked about the pan colors before. You had said that you can re-wet them, and I did ask you about the 2 paints in pans, and you said yes.
Yeah. Again, that's a kind of thing that just when you're putting the tube, which is meant to have that cap on it, meant to be closed up and so on. When you put that in a pan, that can just become I use the word friable. It can become a little bit more brittle. So if you're doing that, if you have something that you can put it
sponge,
right, something that you can kind of keep that a bit moist, that'll help that process.
Okay.
But you can do it. And again, it goes back to that idea that I'm a firm believer with all this art materials information in our education program. What we try to do is share information that helps people make the best decisions for their work. But there's also the point of being an artist, which is experimenting. And there's also the point about being an artist that you can paralyze yourself with too much information sometimes.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes we get people who call us in on a tech line and they've gone so far down a rabbit hole in researching something. And when I know that I'm talking to them and I feel I can be a little bit more loose, and I won't offend somebody, I'll say, are you having fun painting yet? Have you there's so much research and so have you painted anything yet?
Right,
and I think that happens with beginners where they just paralyze themselves. And to me, exploring color too, and that's why I showed even a little just a little chart like that. There was the aqua green and the cobalt green that I showed with some of those cadmium free colors. Well, there's a bunch of greens right there. So that was me just saying, oh, let me experiment. What do cadmiums do? And I get into these all earthy brownish greens. I get into more of, these cooler but lighter values here. So, I'm a bigger believer in just playtime. And that's a lot of, what I do in my sketchbook to prepare for little paintings. My watercolors are all just, quick little daily sketches in there. And, something like this is like a 5-minute thing to just play and be loose and not
color.
Not get so caught up in
aren't loose.
And again, that's a matter of aesthetics, right?
Well,
it's a matter of
part of it is because of what we're trying to replicate. But the other question I had here was the new range of watercolor pencils. So it looks like these are not pure pigment because the pigments are not listed on the package. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's something that we're actually, I think, making a bigger deal of with launching later this year. And I would have, Vicki, I'll have to get back to you. I got somebody I have to check with on that. I don't know, but I do know who to ask. So I'm going to jot that down here now, and I'll shoot you a message about that.
Okay, super. This has
Yeah.
been amazing. I'm sure
Great.
I'll have other questions and we'll set up another time to have you
Yeah.
on, but
Yeah,
I can't
awesome.
thank you enough. It's been
Oh,
fabulous.
listen, I want to thank all of you for spending your time with me this morning. This was just, fun. And I hope I hope the enthusiasm and enjoyment on my part came through because I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
Super. Thank
Stay
you.
warm, stay
Okay.
safe.
You too.
All right.
Take care.
Be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, bye-bye.